Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonic.
All right, we are live. Paul Putera, welcome to the podcast.
How we doing?
Good, man. It's good to get to have you on. You and I've been messaging back and forth on Facebook for quite a while now. We were geeking out on some different things about deer, obviously, and I've heard you on a buddy of mine's podcast, or buddies of mine, the Southern Outdoorsman, in the past, and kind of been following along with you for a while, and being from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, these other places, it was like, man, I gotta get this guy on, talk some deer.
Yep.
So you're from New Jersey then, and do quite a bit of hunting. So talk a little bit about kind of your background, what you do for a living, and kind of how it makes you, how you're able to hunt a lot, and just kind of your drive with that.
Yeah. Well, I work for a family business building docks. So in the wintertime, we don't have work because the lakes freeze over. So I don't have nothing to do in the winter. So I go hunting all winter. So.
Yeah, you can't beat that. It's funny. I've said it on recent shows here, but it's like everybody that's like obsessed with chasing deer and chasing bucks, they all figure out like a job that can allow them to hunt more.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it definitely is. But yeah, and your resume when it comes to hunting deer and just like being efficient with your time has been super impressive. So we'll kind of dive into a little bit of that. But the first thing I want to talk to you about was this travel trailer that you built, that I saw you did a test run on here in turkey season.
Yeah, that thing's awesome. Yeah, it's a enclosed trailer, and it's got I put a full insulation in it. I put air conditioner in it. I put a wood stove in it. And I built all the shelvings, built bunk beds, so it's a sweet little setup. Everything runs off a little Honda generator. It's a 2000i generator or something is what I'm using.
Really? Okay. It's funny because it's like I've always wanted something like that to go on trips and like be able to live out of. And and I hadn't told you this yet, but I've been working with a local off-road shop that was been wanting to build some trailers, and he was, because it taught, like, you see like these crazy price like overlanding trailers that people have and all this different stuff. So I was like, all right. I helped him come up with like the design, and he's been building it, and it's just about done. Like, it'll be done in the next couple of weeks. And this guy's super talented, and a buddy of mine at Hardcore Off-Road. But it's basically, this is an open trailer, but it has like a spot where if someone were to take like an ATV, you could actually fit that in there. It's wide enough for it, or some bikes, or just a bunch of coolers and totes, whatever. It's kind of open in there, but it's got a rack on top that you can either have kind of a roof, or if like I have what I always run on my truck as a rooftop tent, so I can put that on top to be able to sleep in. And then the sides are 11 inches deep, where they have storage in there for gas cans. There'll be water with a spigot that comes out of the side of it, and then a table that folds out so you can like cook on one of those 2-burner stoves. Just kind of like a minimalist setup, but I think it'll be pretty cool to be able to use. And I had them run the tongue the whole way through to the back, so like if you wanted to, you could use one of those. Do you ever see those deer hangers that go into the back of a hitch, so you can hang a deer up and skin it? To be able to have that on the back and everything, it's pretty sweet. So I'm excited to get to try that out. I'm going to take it down to West Virginia this year.
Yeah, I got a bunch of folding tables and big cutting boards. The one deli up the road for me was going out of business, so they were throwing out all the counters and stuff in the back from the kitchen, and it was all cutting board counters. So I'm like, what are you doing with them? And they're like, oh, do you want them? Take them. So I took all the cutting board counters. So I took it to my shop and I cut them up on the table saw and made sections of all these cutting boards and stuff.
Nice.
So I got a pile of them.
Yeah. Are you planning on? Or it sounded like you were planning on making a pretty good loop and trip this year, as far as this fall with hunting.
Yeah, yeah. I'll take it down to West Virginia this year and for the opener, and then I'm gonna go to Ohio, of course, and then I'm probably gonna go. Me and my buddy were talking. He wants to go up to the Adirondacks now, so
Oh,
I might be going up with him to hunt in our spot up there and do some tracking the last week of the season and the end of November.
yep.
And then I might, if I don't fill the West Virginia tag early, I'm going to come back to West Virginia and escape the gun seasons around here because I really don't want to deal with the New Jersey gun seasons.
I can imagine. We were talking beforehand, but where you live in New Jersey, and like that's a very populated area, so like the
Yeah,
public lands get smashed with people, I'm sure.
yeah, they get hammered. So it's tough. It's really tough because every year everything is completely changed. Like you go, oh, I got this sweet buck on a pattern. There's no such thing as a good pattern around here. It's just he's here one day and then he's getting bumped over here the next day. It's like you gotta. I almost do better hunting blind around here because like I've tried to like pattern deer and get cameras out for them around here, and it's almost impossible. Like you know where the spots are where they're gonna be when they show up, but other than that, like they're always getting bumped around from hunting pressure, and then you got a million bears, which the bears end up living right in the bedding areas at the same places the bucks want to live. They like it seems like the bucks and bears prefer the exact same spots. So
Huh.
like it pushes the bucks out and moves them around all the time. Like I don't know how many times you see like but sometimes it could be beneficial to you because I've seen bears go into a bedding area and then all of a sudden you see the big buck come slipping out the back or something.
Yeah.
So it gets them moving sometimes, but at the same time that movement gets them shot too. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And because, yeah, you were messaging me about that because I think I had talked about it with Jacob and Andrew about
Hmm.
bears, and they brought up you and saying how much it bumps them. And I was like, in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, we have bears, but not the problem that you guys have, where they're
Yeah.
competing for feed trees, and like that's insane.
But you got to figure. I hunted last year. I started hunting September. I think was it September 10th opens up in New Jersey, and I hunted New Jersey until I killed my first buck in October 15th. I think it was. Up until that time, I saw a bear every day, and I hunted every single day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's bad because I go out every afternoon. I go out, and on the weekends I hunt full days.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, New Jersey doesn't allow bear hunting anymore.
No. Well, they opened it up last year, midway through the gun season.
Okay.
So basically, the first 3 days of the season ran, and you couldn't shoot bears, and all the pressure was bumping bears past you all day the first 3 days of the gun season. And then by the time they decided they're going to open it, they all the bears were all buried in the swamps where they weren't getting pushed around anymore.
Ah,
Because like everybody just does deer drives up here.
yeah.
So you just 20, 30 people just doing drives everywhere. It's comical. You got one group comes through, and then an hour later they push a different group comes through and pushes it a different way.
Yeah.
It's like there's not even deer left in this spot now. They're already moved.
Yeah, that's funny. So what would you like? How would you describe like a lot of the places that you like to hunt? Do you typically like spend a lot of time in like big woods type areas? Do you like
Yeah,
steep type area? Like what do you kind of like to hunt?
I like the kind of adventure, big woods, deep stuff if I can do it. But recently, I've been shooting a lot of bucks right off the side of the road because all this popularity with everybody going in, everybody's going in deep now.
Yeah.
So now I'm shooting deer 100 yards from the road.
Well, that's by design, Paul. We're trying to help you out. You're
Yeah,
not getting any younger.
yeah, it
We're
makes
not
my
getting any
drag
younger.
easier.
We're trying to get the younger guys to go deeper in the woods and then push the deer out
Yeah,
closer to the
I
roads.
think it's so interesting because like I kind of like started watching the podcasts and stuff at the same time this whole boom came with the hunting pressure and everything. Whenever it's all of a sudden public land got really popular, and like you can physically like see the patterns changing from year to year. Like, oh, like originally like the deer would be in clear cuts a lot more and stuff, and now the pressure's building in them, and now you're seeing the deer coming out of the clear cuts and using it as a destination food source. You're seeing like a total swing in the deer behavior over the years now from pressure from like it's like whatever the topic is for the summer, by the end of the summer, like don't hunt that year immediately because it's probably going to be affected by everybody talking about it.
Yeah,
It's
it's
kind of
funny.
interesting how it builds up.
It is, and I've kind of seen that with elk hunting too. Like it was when I first started, getting into elk hunting. I read a book, and it was like go as far in as you possibly can, backpack in, get to these remote spots. That's where the elk are. All the pressure's by the roads. Well, everybody started doing that, and
Yeah.
then I found that you were more efficient if you just camped at the truck and would hike into these spots that were closer and then just keep bouncing around. And it was just like things had shifted, and I'm sure it'll switch back at some point. It's just like these ebbs and flows
Yeah.
with pressure.
Yeah. You got to start hunting elk like you hunt big bucks.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I actually, by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be out. But I was talking to Randy Newberg out west, and he was talking about how everything is changed, and then he was talking about what he sees and what whitetail hunters do well, and there's like a lot of correlation between whitetail hunters that do well in the elk woods. The biggest thing that screws whitetail hunters while elk hunting is that they're too patient or too worried about sound and scent and things like that. But
Yep.
everything else, by the way that whitetail hunters read the wind and thermals and understand how that all works, really plays off really well in the elk woods.
And you could take that Western hunting and really put it right into timbered woods if you're hunting deer. Like if you look at like you watch videos and research on high mountain mule deer and you see how they're moving around in these, like they'll go up into the bowl or whatever, and you watch how they shift around in beds and stuff during the day as the temperatures change and stuff. They're shifting beds, they're getting up and feeding. That stuff's all happening in the woods around here too. It's just you can't see it because you can't spot them through the trees, but it's happening. So you could really take that and put that into strategy when you're hunting around here.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny you say that because that's my cousin Mason is an absolute killer in the whitetail woods, but he's become obsessed with hunting high country mule deer, and he's like, it's made me a better whitetail hunter because I watch how they bed, and he said the exact same thing. He's like, it's basically like taking the mountains or the big woods and taking all the trees off, and you can kind of see how they're moving based off the sun and the shade and the thermals and the wind and how they're finding those pockets. And it's funny when he said that, it was like a light bulb went off. It's like, it's so true because they, you and I've talked about, like, those deer don't just lay in that same bed and don't move for the entire day. And I know that's a big part of your strategy with killing these deer.
Yeah, it is because sometimes you can't get them in certain spots, but if you know that they're going to get up and move during the daylight or something, you can get into these places and just kind of be like, okay, eventually he's going to get up and wander over this way, because like a lot of times you find these big bucks and they're going to usually bed within close proximity of like a spring or something up in the mountains. Some of those higher mountains, if you could find a spring at a higher elevation where most of the water is down low, I mean, you're going to find some good stuff around those, because anything that wants to get up, instead of going down the mountain, they can just side hill over and get to a water source or something. And if you find it with the right habitat built around it, where you got good bedding habitat and stuff, I mean, that's going to put a big buck in that spot. You know,
What do you consider a good bedding habitat?
they got to be able to get up and feed within close, like if they could just stand up out of their beds and they can eat, that's a plus. So like I like to focus on uh, areas where I find like gypsy moth kills from the trees, or you get the ash borers now that are killing all the trees off, or the elms get the blight and all the elms die off and stuff. Those areas where that canopy, all the standing dead poles, you get that dead timber up there, it changes the habitat on the bottom, on the so that usually gives me that diversity that I want, because then you all of a sudden get these plants that never grow anywhere else because of the mature hardwood forbs, so all of a sudden you got all these rare forbs and lilies and all these weird plants that don't grow anywhere else. And you got that dead, decaying wood all on the ground, putting moisture into the soil, and because it's a big thing on all that. Is it's not just not just a spot, but it's also like soil health and stuff. Like if you got like crappy soil, this stuff doesn't grow right there. It doesn't make the diversity in the food. So when you find those good pockets, moisture and food and cover and terrain and water, and you put all that together, then you're going to find the best spots.
Yeah, and it's funny. That's again another correlation. Out west is like one thing I've learned is areas where you find beetle kill in the mountains. So like basically the pine trees and the conifer trees will die off, and it gets to a point where it allows sunlight to come in, and all these grasses and plants and stuff grow up because where they were drowned out before, and the elk just freaking pound it. You got to get it to like the point before they get so dead they fall over and it turns into just like a pile of sticks that you can't get through. But that makes total sense. I mean, it's the same concept of like what they're doing with a logging cut. Essentially, when they're thinning it out and clearing it, it's allowing that sunlight to come through and that new growth to come up. Yeah,
except it's even better because nature made it, and nature is chaos, so nothing's ever the same. So like you get a clear cut, it's just a block. There's no pattern to it. They're just cutting the timber in this marked off area. But when you get nature doing that kind of destruction, fire too, same thing. You get fire doing it. It burns different, hotter and work over here than over there, and it just completely changes how everything grows in that whole area.
Yeah, and two, it's like, and say that were to happen, on the side hills and some of these places that they don't traditionally like to log unless they have to, that are more difficult to get the trees out of, which creates better bedding habitat and places for them to live at and feel a little more secure.
Yep.
And going back to talking about some of that bedding habitat, do you tend to, when you're talking about like a spring seep or something that would be coming out of that hill, so traditionally that's not like what you hear as far as like bucks bedding on the points and having like, that's a whole different, that sounds like coming out of the side of the mountain somewhere in an area.
They'll be on features, but they're going to be on micro features, like not the big stuff.
Yep.
It doesn't take much for a buck to have a bedding area. It's just food or eyes. He's got to be able to see and hear and smell. It's that normally when you can get that combination all together, that's usually when you find the bigger bucks. From what I see, like most of the deer around here, they want visual. They want some kind of visual. They want to be able to see what's going on because there's so much people that they got to be able to see, okay, this guy's over here and this guy's over here. And okay, so I can get through over here and escape, so they want to be in a place where they can monitor that kind of access. So like a lot of my spots I hunt, I'm shooting deer right next to hiking trails, next to roadsides, near parking lots, like a lot of places where a buck would sit there and just watch what's going on, you know. And like even like the does, he's not going to bed with the does. He's going to bed off somewhere to the side and watch the does, you know. And then he can see if you start walking into that bedding area and bumping all those deer around near him, he can sit there and stand up in his bed and watch what's going on and watch what all the other deer are doing and make his own decision on what he needs to do to survive, you know. And that's every time you look at a bed, you got to really think about all that kind of stuff that's going on, because a big buck that's how he's living. You know, he's got to have certain a certain plan to escape. You know?
Yeah. And if he got that old, if it's a big mature deer, he didn't figure that out from being stupid. If he would have been stupid, he would have got shot at some. And maybe it's a lot of luck, but they eventually get smart and figure those things out. But that's such a good point on the does. Like they act as bucks use them. They use them as an alarm system so many times. You find that, and you might not even ever see that buck. Mostly, you probably wouldn't, because by the time you spook those does, you know, he slipped out and he was gone.
Yeah, or he didn't even go anywhere, and he just didn't come in because he just got edgy.
Yep.
You know, he'll be like, maybe I'll wait a little while before I come in now. You know, and then you lose your opportunity at him. So it's so hard. That's the thing I think a lot of people screw up on is access. You know, because if you don't access those spots right too, it's such a puzzle to do all that, like between finding the beds, finding where the deer are, and then you got to figure out access, how to get in clean. There's so many things you got to do in order to actually kill a deer. Sometimes it's crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of overwhelming too. Like I'll get into situations and it seems like it's very rare that two situations are alike. It's like so important to learn the recognizing of these different things and just try to play it through your head and just be like, and get creative with it sometimes, because there's not like a good rule of thumb that always you come in from this way or you do this. It's like you have to get creative with it and figure it out.
Yeah. And I spend a lot of time after the season scouting and learning not just the bedding, but how they're traveling, why they're traveling, where they're traveling, like trying to figure out the whole thing. So I'm not necessarily always even using that information to kill a deer in that spot, but I'm using that as, you know, I'm putting it in there. So when I go into a spot and I see something, I can kind of make a good judgment on what I'm going to have to do next based on my past experiences in something, you know. And that's what I do a lot, because I kill a lot of deer. Like I know they're there, but I'm very blind because I don't use cameras I don't do a lot of cameras or anything like that. I have some, but like I don't use any of that kind of pattern stuff like that. Like I go in there, I physically find the sign that I want. You know, I'll find a buck down on the bottom and backtrack him up a mile and a half away, and then figure out, okay, he's going to be up here, and I'll go up there and kill him. You know, I don't necessarily put a camera out and go, okay, he's going to come in on this and he's going to do that. It's a lot of it's just built up from time in the woods.
Yeah.
You know.
And the backtracking thing is so interesting. And you're talking about like in the bottoms. Is that because like you can see the tracks easier in the bottom because it's, you know, usually wetter and softer?
Well, that's 100%. You can see and track like rainy days. People like will take a day off on a rainy day or something. I'm going to go out and I'm going to be on the ground and I'm going to be looking because I can see tracks really good then. You know, like I take advantage of that kind of stuff. Like if it rained all night, I'm not going to go sit in the morning. I'm going to be driving around checking deer trails, crossing roads and stuff, and looking for a big set of tracks. You know, because the deer get bumped around and move so much around me that I have to do it that way because there's no real pattern. You just got to take the pattern that's unfolding for that day and capitalize on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's such a good point. And like the thing with the bottoms is like I was just talking to somebody the other day, and I was like, if you don't know anything about like looking for certain features on a map or doing anything, just walk the bottom of a drainage. And
Hmm.
like if you're scouting in the spring, sometimes I'll just like walk. I'll like say I'm gonna walk 2 miles up this drainage, and I'll mark these trails and what I'm seeing and tracks and stuff that are in there. Come back to the best one and follow it up in the hills, and then you start getting up there and you start seeing like, okay, what makes sense for a
Hmm.
deer to, what makes them feel comfortable living in this
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. And I've done that. Like the one, I think I should get pictures of that buck I just got back from the taxidermist.
Yeah.
You know, that deer there, I tracked that deer 1.75 miles from the road in bare ground, you know. But I followed that deer back, and it took me 4.5 hours to follow that deer back to where I thought he was probably bedded up for the day, you know. But like you get up to a certain point, and then you don't have any more sign, you know, and then you're like, okay, where would I go if I was this deer? You know, you follow it that way, and then okay, here's a scrape. Let me go check. Nope, he doesn't have his track in this scrape. All right. Oh, here's a patch of mud. I can walk over and check this wet spot here and see if I can pick up his track over here. You're looking for like little clues along the way. You're not like physically following tracks the whole distance, you know. So like the last leg of that before I set up for that deer, I hit a scrape line and there was his tracks going both directions on it, and I had to make a decision which way is he going. You know,
Yeah.
I'm like, is he coming this way on it, or is he going to be going this way? You know, it's like I'm like, then I pull up my map and I'm looking. I'm like, well, if he's going that way, he's getting into a spot that's going to get more pressure from people. You know, I'm like, so I'm going to bet that he's probably over on this side. You know, and then
Yeah.
I look on the map and I see this perfect bowl with like a swamp in the bowl on the top of the mountain, and it's all these ledges and benches and stuff. I'm like, that's got to be where he's laying down, you know. And sure enough, that's what when I set up for that deer, he stood up at 170 yards away and came right in. You know, but it had I went 20 feet farther forward, I would have never seen that deer because he would have seen me. You know, but it's just like just full trust in the gut to kill that deer. You know, it's like I knew he was there, but it's like I never even went in there and looked for him.
How did you know when to stop? That was like when I had a scouting camp here recently. That was the number one question people asked when we were walking, we were finding sign. I'm like, oh, this good sign. They're like, well, how do you know when to stop? And that's a
You
hard question to
you
answer.
you learn to stop by jumping a lot of deer.
Yes,
that's
yeah,
that's the honest truth. You're gonna just keep blow. Eventually, you keep blowing them out. You're gonna learn not to blow them out.
yeah.
You know.
And I feel like I've always been like really, I've been on the more aggressive side, which has like
Hmm.
led me to blowing more out than not. And
Yep.
that's helped me learn though, like to be able to recognize it, because before I'd get like, I do the tiptoe thing. And this is where the hate of cameras and history in an area, where the negative of this is for me. I know too
Hmm.
much about the area that I start taking previous experiences too much and being like, I think I think he was laying in here at some point, but the sign's not telling me that he's right there at that point. But then I stop and it's too early, and then you don't see
Yep.
anything, and it's like sometimes it's pushing that envelope, and like once you do it enough, you feel like this Bucky feeling, like, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, now we're
Yeah.
starting to get to a spot where if he is laying in this bowl somewhere on one of these little tiny points that are coming out, like he could probably see me or smell me or
Yeah.
something.
And when you're moving into those spots, be ready to shoot, because I've killed two Pennsylvania bucks in the last 2 years before I even got to a tree. You know, that I killed that big 7.5 year old, whatever he was, is a 143 in 2020. I killed that deer on the ground at 10 feet. You know, I shot that deer from the ground, still hunting, tracking him. And then
Really?
I killed my buck last year doing the same thing at like 10 feet on the ground in Laurel.
Dang.
Is all of a sudden I see the rack coming out of the laurel. I'm like full draw and bow. You know, he wasn't. He was only he was probably a 3.5-year-old. He wasn't a big Pennsylvania deer, but I mean he was a 7-pointer. He was 22 inches inside, but he just had these little tiny points on him, just big long beams. He's like Bullwinkle.
Yeah.
I saw that deer, and I mean I'm like a mile and a half back in the woods, on a big laurel knob, and I see that thing at 10 feet coming through the laurel grunting. I'm like, you're getting ready, but like I'm following the scrape line in there to go kill that deer.
Yeah.
And it was cool though, because when I went in there to kill that deer, I was scouting and marking places to kill deer along the way, for potential sits for the following day. And I killed my deer. My buddy came up, helped me drag it out, and I put him in one of those spots, and he killed his buck the following day, which is even bigger than the one I shot. So
Dang.
we doubled up, and so we had 2 big bucks down in the same area within less than 24 hours, and never been in there before, completely blind.
And another point that you can't stress enough is the walking with an arrow knocked when you're still hunting and doing that. Like I can't, it gives me anxiety if I see somebody like with a bow on their back, or if it's just in their hand and not an arrow knocked. Like when you're in those spots where you're like in some good sign, it's like, dude, like you gotta be ready, because sometimes they'll hold tight too and pop up right when you get close to them, and you can get them to stop out at 25, 30 yards sometimes and get a shot.
Yeah. Or you shoot them point blank, like I keep doing.
Yeah.
I think I killed 7 bucks now at like 10 feet, like that, like on frontals and stuff. Stupid shots coming right at me. Like, they're all of a sudden you're walking the trail, and they're coming down the trail the other way. So you're meeting head on. So like you're just like, oh crap, get the bow back, and then as soon as he steps into an opening, you just flat.
Yeah. But, yeah, and how when you're still hunting / scouting, kind of backtracking these deer, like how fast are you walking at that point?
If I'm in a spot where I think the deer's at nighttime, I'm moving pretty quick. But I'm moving slow enough that like what helps you a lot is when you're doing it without snow, you got to go like a snail anyway to just read sign. So you got to be pretty meticulous. So you end up still hunting as you go, just to read the sign properly, because like you can't miss anything. Like sometimes you just get tipped off. Like you'll come around a corner, and all of a sudden you'll notice there's a lot of browsing right here. It's like why are these deer browsing so much right here? Well, if they're going to be browsing bushes and stuff, they're probably bedding nearby. Because they'll get up out of a bed and they'll browse. So you kind of let that stuff tip you off. You see that kind of stuff, you're like, oh, I better slow down.
Yeah.
I got to really pay attention now.
Yeah. When you see that, like the browsing areas like that, is that like a sign to stop a lot of times and maybe set up, or is it you still kind of keep going?
It starts to really indicate something, because you're probably inside the bedding area at that point, if you're actually picking up browse.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, I better slow down, because they might have been bedded right here this morning, because this is a sunny spot. But if I look over there now, I can see there's a patch of hemlocks over there that's shaded out, and I mean it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They're probably moved back into those hemlocks in the shade for the afternoon. And then okay, I'm going to set up here, and they're going to get up and come past me. You just you got to feel it out like that. Or if you notice, they're like, oh, there's a lot of sign on that oak ridge I went to before. So from this point, I'm going to J hook out and go up and get between those hemlocks and that oak ridge.
Yeah.
You make like a move like that.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of reading sign on the fly, and then like making decisions from it, and it's so hard, because like if you haven't done it, it's difficult to know what to do, but the more you do it, and like you said, like honestly, a good thing to do is just screw it up a whole lot of times,
Yeah.
and then you start seeing those trends.
Yeah. And pay attention when you're scouting deer. Scout to jump them. Don't just go crashing through an area. Be like, oh, look, here's a sign over here, and yelling to your buddy and stuff. Like, go nice and easy. Go quiet. Jump them. You're going to learn way more if you jump the deer than if you didn't jump them. So and sometimes that tips me off to some of the biggest bucks I've ever seen. The biggest buck I killed in Pennsylvania. That's how that whole journey started. I jumped that deer 3 days earlier. I go into a spot, a completely blind spot I never been to, and I go down in there, and I'm like, if I was a giant buck on this 15,000 acre chunk of woods, where am I going to live? And I just got lucky to where I picked the spot the deer was bedded. And I went in there to go. I'm like, I'm going to work in here, and I'm going to check it out and feel it as I go. And if it feels good, I'll set up. And just about where the point I wanted to set up, I jumped it. So I jumped that deer 3 days earlier, and then I came back in the morning. I set up directly over that tree in the morning. I figured out, I'm like, if he comes back through here, I'm going to drill him when he comes back to his bed. But he never came back. So that day, I spent the whole day learning his pattern, but I went the wrong direction down the swamp line. And I'm like walking this pattern. I'm like, this sign is getting older and older as I go down to this swamp. Because I think the swamp's was like 4,000 acre swamp. So I'm like, but it's getting older and older. I'm like, this is transitioning out to like September, early October sign. And the habitat is also telling me the same thing. So I'm like, the following day, I came back in and I started working the other end of the swamp. And I'm like, okay, now it's starting to pick up, But I had to make sure, I had to clear it to make sure that end was clear first and work that piece first, But then when I'm going in to set up where I thought that buck was going to be bedded again, I come around the corner and he's rubbing a tree at 30 yards, and I'm between him and I'm in the rhododendron along the edge of the swamp, and he's rubbing his big signpost tree, and he turns. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take a shot at this thing. I'm like, the wind's switching. I can move. I maneuvered while he's rubbing the tree. I used that and maneuvered so I could get an angle, And then he stood up when he finished rubbing the tree. He stood up and he turned and walked right at me. And he came right around when he came around the rhododendron bush, I'm standing there looking at him, and I shoot him straight through, almost straight frontal. Like I hit him right here, right to the heart, and then out like the last rib.
Yeah.
And he took off. I had to physically step out of the way so he wouldn't take me out as he went past me. And then he crashed I think 80 yards away from me. He just dumped.
Oh,
he was gone.
That's such a deadly shot too.
Yeah.
At close distances to be able to those frontal shots. Because if you have a good arrow set up that you're confident going through there, I've watched it. My favorite one was this big 11 point. At the time, it was my dad's biggest deer, and back in 2005, that he shot frontal in a clear cut, and he was going through and he was grunting, and he was hunting this buck for a bunch of days and never could get him outside of his clear cut. So he went in on the ground, and he had grunted, and it came into 5 yards frontal, and he shot it, and the arrow, and he had the muzzy 4-blade broadheads were sticking out of the back leg, a good 5-6 inches out of the back leg. Went the whole way through him and out the other side. Such a deadly shot.
Yeah, that's I always shoot the. I'm shooting those Sever mechanicals now. I'm actually shooting mechanicals.
Okay.
They don't break, but what I do is I shoot a 500 grain arrow with them. And I have a 31-inch draw, so
oh my gosh,
nothing really gets past me with that draw length. So that at 72 pounds, it's blasting through.
Yeah,
I have to worry. I have more problems tuning fixed blade broadheads because of my draw length and stuff. than anything.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and those Severs are cool heads. Like
Yeah, I
are
love
they
them.
what are they, the inch and a half cut? Is that the one that you use?
I got the 2 inch in mine right
The
now.
2 inch ones. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, that makes
they don't
sense.
deflect. That's what's nice about them because I've killed probably 25 deer with them now. I killed a lot of deer with them. That's the benefit of living in New Jersey.
Yeah,
You could shoot $6 and you could shoot unlimited does. So if you want to shoot something and put something in the freezer, you could go out and shoot a doe every day.
yeah,
Okay? If not multiples. You just go down to the urban zones and take them out.
yeah. That gives you practice.
It gives you lots of practice. You learn a lot about broadheads and what's good and what's not. And you know,
Yeah, shot placement, like
mhm.
all those different things, and that's where I always felt like I put myself at a disadvantage with growing up hunting these low deer density areas and one buck one doe
Mhm.
type of deal, and we weren't like it was like a sin to shoot does before, like so it was like
Yeah,
basically it was like one deer a year and that was it, and you just don't get a lot of practice with that, so it like felt like my learning curve to get shooting deadly at animals took a little bit longer than to be able to shoot 5 6 deer a year.
yeah. That's it. I got my first buck in New York State at our prop. We have property in New York. I think we got like 150 acres or something up there. When I was a kid, I shot a spike up there, and then I killed a second buck in Pennsylvania that year. And then the following year, I killed one with the bow, and then I killed one in New York, one in Pennsylvania again. Actually, no, I killed another one. I'm trying to remember it. It's like a million years ago. But yeah, I think killed 4 bucks that year, and then my third year, I just started going Rambo with it, and like once I figured out how to kill them with the bow, it was like it was downhill for all the deer around me at that point.
Yeah.
'Cause
Do
there's
you do you do you feel like that's helped you a lot now with like once you have an opportunity to big buck that you just feel super confident because of all that
yeah,
experience?
I don't get shaken up too bad when I shoot. Like usually, I get a little jittery after I shoot, but I don't get like freaked out. Like I'm always in control. I know exactly what I'm doing. I don't black out or anything. Like you hear the stories. Like my uncle was notorious for that. He'd shoot everything in the antlers.
Yeah.
He'd see the antlers. Every buck he ever killed during gun season had a slug going through the rack. It's like what are you doing? But you get asphyxiated on that, and that's what he would do.
Yeah. That's funny. Going back to some things you were talking about when you're like tracking these deer on dry ground and you're kind of going in and finding these areas, you're talking about finding good sign and hot sign. What are you considering like good sign or like that you're looking at that's fresh?
Mostly it's going to be tracks for me.
Okay.
I'm going a lot off of footprints. Like I'll like if I see a rub, I'm like, okay, sweet, a rub. That means I can walk up to it and see if there's a track on the ground from the deer that made it. You know, I'm really concerned about the foot. Because there's only so many deer in the woods that make a 200-pound track. You know,
Yeah.
and I'm sure like there's some areas around me that have really big rack deer but smaller bodies, and I'm sure I've walked right past some really magnum deer over the years. But if you look at my history of what I've been shooting a lot of deer like 190 to 200 pounds because I'm always going off foot size.
The track.
And
Yeah.
then most of the time it means it's got big rack too. You know,
What's a good rule of thumb for people like when they're identifying a track to know it's like a mature buck or a heavy buck?
it all depends on where you live, because you got different. Like around here, I go with like a 4-finger track.
Hmm.
Like I want at least like it. So I got really big fingers. So I need a tape measure. It'd probably be like 3.5 inches.
Yeah.
wide. And then it would be like probably 4 inches long.
Yeah. That makes sense. And two,
I'm
like, I
looking
mean,
I'm looking for a rounded toe too. I want a more rounded out toe because if it's long and sharp, it's usually a big deer that's younger because they don't wear their hooves out as much. Once they get older, they start getting big chips in the hooves and stuff, and they start wearing the toes down and grinding them out. So you can almost see like they get like wide in the toe. It's like flattened out. Like you can see where it just worn out, like an old sneaker.
yeah.
You know,
I
so
love when you find the ones that are like all crooked and like you can just tell
mhm.
like the toes want like there was a buck that I remember I'd always find his track and it was just like he had this crooked toe and it was like that was the easiest buck to be able to identify
Yeah,
because it was so
yeah, you got
obvious.
one busted toe.
Yeah.
I've hunted deer like that. I had one that had a short toe. He
Really?
had like it was like he had one long toe and the other one was about the half the length. So you as soon as you saw him, you knew exactly what deer it was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really funny, and two, like, I mean, I'm sure that'd be harder on like dry ground because you're finding like a single track that's giving you that information. But like in the snow, I like looking at ones that are wide apart, like the
Yeah,
footprints are
yeah,
wide, like width apart, because then it means like they probably have a pretty big barrel chest on them.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Sometimes you can find that when you're walking in bare ground too. Like they'll cross a muddy patch. You can get tracks and you can measure the width, or they cross a brook or something, a stream, and they get to the sand on a brook or something. Or if they walk through moss, you can get an imprint and measure the width, or even leaves. Sometimes if the leaves are wet enough, you can get like the little pock marks in the leaves as they go. But moss is really good because moss has a spring back to it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
if you see where deer are walking through moss and you can see that imprint in the moss, it took a certain amount of hours for it to rise back up. So it tells you how far behind you are a lot of times.
Ah, that's a good tip. I would not have thought of that.
Yep.
Yeah, because like you think, yeah, moss is kind of like carpet. Like when you go down on it
Hmm.
and it comes back up. Like for example, you have a chair sitting on a carpet for a while, it'll wear down, but when you
Yep.
remove that chair, after a while, it comes back up.
Yep. It's even like dirt. It's critical to age a track. Like even in dirt, like it's going to be a lot crisper when they first step in the dirt. Then a couple hours later, it's going to start kind of crumbling and moving out. You know, and that could be the difference between you going to the right location or the wrong one if you find where that deer is going back and forth.
Yeah,
You'll be like, okay, his track's a lot fresher going this way. And you just got to look at those subtle little things. A lot of people mess up and they'll walk right through it and step right on the sign, and then they won't be able to read it. So like when I'm like following a deer, I always try to walk right off to the edge of the deer trails or something. So if I gotta turn around and go back, I might pick something I missed. I try not to tamper with the sign I'm following. Just like when you're blood trailing a
I
deer.
was just gonna say, just like blood trail on a deer. That's
Yeah, yeah,
exactly right.
it's the same thing. You're just doing it the whole time you're hunting.
Yeah, that's been ingrained in my head because my dad would yell at me all the time if we'd be tracking a deer and I'd be like walking in the tracks like no stay off to the side and to in
Yeah,
case we miss something or we lose the blood and need to go back and figure out the track and all that different stuff. That's a
yep.
really good tip. And then like and it too so like tracks are your main kind of sign but in rubs you're walking up and looking for a track and scrapes you're
Yeah,
looking at the track.
yeah.
Is there
And
anything with those things that
with like the
do get
rub,
you
like
excited?
I will look in the rubs like for gouging and burr marks and stuff. Like usually a lot of the older bucks, they got a rougher rack on the bases and stuff. So you want to find those nice quarter-inch gouges or deeper around the tree, like where they're really pushing in with the bases. And just you can get the measurement from the base height high as he can lift his head on the rub, and then you can measure up from that and find the little gray scratch lines above it on the tree. And you can measure his rack out, and see how tall he is and figure that out. Like I had the one buck I was following last year. He rubbed a cluster of trees, and he was rubbing the one tree, and it was a pretty substantial, like 3.5-inch tree, but he was hitting a bush like 1.5 to 2 feet away behind that tree. So I'm like, he's got long tines to be able to reach from there and hit the backside of that and tickle that other tree while he's rubbing. So I'm like, this buck is probably the one I'm after because of just the overall size of the rack on this one. It kind of builds the shape of the deer I'm tracking.
Yeah.
So you can predict what the deer looks like before you even get to him.
It's so crazy. It took me so long to pick up on that. Like when a buddy of mine, Greg Litzinger, he taught me a lot about rubs, because I just looked at rubs for the most part and was like, okay, there's a rub. That's a signpost. I like that a little more. And just kind of, there's a cluster. Okay, maybe he's bedding somewhere in here, and kind of like had the basics. But once I really started, and he was telling me about, like, look at the rub, see what's behind it, see what's being touched. Is there just, even a little nick off a branch behind it? Like, what is this deer doing? And you may not be 100% right, but you can kind of gain an idea or a reasonable assumption off of it.
Yeah. Because I've walked up to some stuff and you look at it and you're like, the normal guy would look at that and be like, oh, yeah, that's nice. But if you physically get up and look at it, you'd be like, that doesn't look like much, but it actually is. That's a big deer that did that.
Yeah.
Like you could just tell the difference.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between hunting sign and hunting good sign.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And then what about scrapes? Like what do you look at for scrapes?
Scrapes, I'm looking for track size. I'm looking for the width, the demeanor of the deer that's doing it. Like a mature buck builds a scrape differently than a younger deer. Like they're gonna dig it out harder. They're gonna be more exact on where they place them. Like it makes sense why it's there. Like you look at it and you're like, okay, those are coming off of this way. This trail is intersecting here. This is placed exactly here for exactly this reason. Like you could, like, they don't make a scrape for nothing. Like a younger buck, you see a younger buck, they'll be pawing around.
Yeah.
They want to do it, but they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But a big buck knows exactly what he's doing. Like he knows, okay, this is Jenny over here, and I'm going to go over here and make a scrape for Jenny. And then I'm going to go to Betty down the ridge here and make one for her. Like he knows exactly where every single deer is in that forest.
Yeah.
And you'll get that. You'll get that. They don't just make their rounds in the rut. They do that all year round up in the mountains. I swear they get out and do these excursions in the summer as much as they do any other time of the year.
Yep.
Like you put cameras on scrapes and that buck will be over here, and he came all the way over to that place because he's checking on his girls over there. And he's making sure they're still there and making sure everything's cool, and then he gets on his way and he goes to his other place. So like it's tricky when you get him on camera. Sometimes you think this buck is right there in your lap. But no, he just came through here for a couple days in the summer, and he was just checking stuff out over here. And actually, he lives 4 miles that way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you can see that from the GPS color data, like looking at it and see like these certain bucks will make these excursions. And I've always found from my cameras that running a lot of cameras was August time frame, I'd have some of the biggest bucks show up and then just disappear. They come in and then they go away, and then like they might come back during the rut, or there might be a period when they come back. But it's like, my opinion, that he's just checking out he's like, all right, what's this look like, this year? Where's everybody hanging out at? What's the situation like? And just do these little excursions.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonic. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.